Hello everyone, I'm Emily.
And I'm Hannah.
And we are the hosts of the I Don't Think So podcast. Each episode we discuss a different story, theory, or mystery, and decide if we think it's believable or if we really don't think so.
Here at the I Don't Think So podcast, we are affiliated with Flurry Sports, and we present our theories, mysteries, and stories on your favorite place to listen to podcasts every Wednesday. If you like what you hear, definitely like and share our show. Follow us on our socials at I Don't Think So _EH. And DM us with your own ideas of what we should do.
Please. Because we're coming up on a new month here pretty quick, and I don't know what we're going to do.
It'll be a fun surprise for all of us.
We'll see what happens. It'll all of a sudden be next month, we'll be like, June. It'll roll up. Which officially means we'll be like really in summer.
Yeah, I already feel like it's summer.
It is.
So I just need it to be summer.
But my brain is still not quite there yet, because this morning I was like, it's probably not warm enough to wear pants like that, or like shorts. That was my brain thought. And then I went, it's probably 70 something. I was like, It is definitely warm enough to wear shorts.
We are still in that moment though, where it's like cold in the morning. And then by lunch, you're like, I am dying.
Nobody look at me because I'm already sweating.
Yeah.
And the piercing heat of your gaze will absolutely kill me.
Oh, yeah.
So this is our last week of our true crime month, which is exciting.
It is. I think this is something that we enjoy talking about, learning about, hearing different stories. So yeah, it's been a good month.
It's been a good time. I like true crime. Sometimes I feel weird saying I like true crime, but I do.
I think there's a general fascination of like horror and things like that.
Macabre.
Yeah.
Which I can't spell. Anyway, so today we're going to be talking a little bit about this guy named Ed Graf. Have you ever heard of him? 1988 crime. So
1988 seems like a bad year for crime.
Big year to be a cop that year. But I think I don't know. The 80s feels rough to me in general when it comes to crime. I don't know why.
I know. I don't know.
If something happened.
Feels like the Wild West.
I'm telling you, to be a criminal back in the day, like literally.
If you didn't get away with stuff, you were an idiot.
Shut your mouth.
Honestly, even today though.
Yeah, I'm kidding. Just shut up and you might not get caught. But
what we've learned is there's a lot of stupid people in this world.
No kidding. So this one is another one that's kind of got a lot of weird, like, things that happen in it.
Okay.
So
I love a twisty-turny.
Little twisty-turnies. Let me tell you a little bit first about Mr. Ed. Ed sucked at a lot of things.
Same.
Ed was a bad employee. He worked at Community Bank in Texas in the 1980s and allegedly embezzled from his employer while being there. He eventually had to pay the bank more than $75,000 to avoid prosecution.
In the 80s.
In the 80s. That man had to pay a hell of a lot of money. When you could buy a home, in the 80s for like 2 raspberries.
Ed.
But it's alleged because the bank never would press charges because he did pay them this lump sum of cash to try and cover that whole thing.
Suspicious.
Ain't that great? Ed also is a bad husband. His ex-wife Claire would call him, quote, the most possessive person I've ever known. Claire's best friend Carol Schaefer said her husband Earl saw Ed having sex with another woman the night of his bachelor party.
Well, that doesn't seem right.
Just because it's your quote-unquote last night of freedom doesn't mean you're not still in a relationship.
Should, take people up on it, you know?
Just because you're married, you can still cheat when you're dating, but that's fine. And Ed, according to Claire and her family, was also a bad father. Ed, you're striking out. 2 of Claire's family members would accuse him of beating his adopted stepsons, Joby and Jackson, with a board and a belt. I love that. So in 1988... Joby, Joby. Not great names.
So not on top of it, he named his child.
No. Those were his stepsons. He adopted them. So she named her children Joby and Jackson.
Okay, continue.
Texas in the 80s, not good names.
Yeah.
Sorry if your name's Joby. But anyways, in 1988, a Texas jury would find that Ed Graf was also a murderer.
Jesus.
So prosecutors argued that 2 years earlier, on August 26th, 1986, Graf would knock out Joby, who was 9 at the time, and Jason, who was 8, and he placed the boys in the back of their family shed. He then would spread gasoline, lock the shed, and set the boys ablaze.
He killed Joby.
Sorry.
This is a whirlwind for me. I was just trying to come to terms with his name. I'd finally come around to it, and now he's dead.
And they're really cute. Here's a picture of them.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. Cute. These 2 boys, obviously, are very similar in age. They were inseparable, athletic, blonde-haired, and they would die, unfortunately, of smoke inhalation and severe burns in the backyard of their home on Angel Fire Drive.
Yikes.
Ain't that creepy?
Big yikes. You said that he didn't get charged with this till later, though?
Correct. 2 years.
Oh.
So on the day of the fire, Ed would break the news to Claire, saying that both boys had been lost in the fire. What a guy.
Oh, like he's saying it started on fire. He wasn't sure where they were.
Mm-hmm.
Got it.
Yeah, basically he was like, oh, I don't know what happened. It's on fire. And then he's like, oh my God, the boys, they're in there.
How sad.
How sad. I guess they died.
Jesus.
But Ed would be informed that the body of only one of the children had been found, but not both.
Oh.
It was one of the many pieces of circumstantial evidence.
Is Joby still alive?
No, unfortunately they did both die. One of them was just so badly burnt, I'm pretty sure, that they couldn't really get his body.
That's sad.
Mm-hmm.
I was hoping it was like a
escape,
like a thing story, the camp story where the kid gets out or something.
No,
that's too bad.
No kid survived this one, unfortunately. It was one of the many pieces of circumstantial evidence that prosecutors would use against Ed as this calculating, greedy, and awful monster who murdered the children in a desperate attempt to keep his marriage together.
Huh.
Because obviously children. Bleh.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the steps I would take. Maybe counseling.
No! Fucking therapy?
That's sad for them, though.
Mm-hmm. Other small clues seem to point to Ed's guilt. Multiple witnesses say they saw gasoline container on the porch and not far from the kids' bikes.
Oh.
Ed also acted really weird after the fire. He suggested that the boys be buried in only one coffin.
Ew. Okay. Weird. Well, I say that as our grandmother.
As our grandmother's like, just wait to bury me, or just wait to bury Grandpa. Put me in with them. And we're like, that's not how it works.
Sad.
I'm sorry.
That's really sad.
He also would never really offer any kind of consolation or apologies to his wife because the boys were in his care at the time as the fire started.
Mm-hmm.
A few weeks after the fire, Ed returned about $50 worth of Joby and Jackson's new school clothes that he had previously insisted they kept the tags on for. And there was more of what others saw as signs of foreknowledge. He knew it was going to happen.
He
knew that these kids were no longer going to be in his care. The normally meticulous Ed, who was said to keep lists of everything, neglected to buy the boys cereal or fill Jason's dime tap prescription the week of their deaths. So again, letting things go as if you know that the boys are no longer going to be around.
Yeah.
In addition to the circumstantial evidence, prosecutors were able to kind of present motive. So weeks before the fire, Ed had taken out a $100,000 worth of combined life insurance on the boys if they were to die in an accident.
Jesus.
Which, can we I'm not saying you should figure out how to murder people appropriately. But immediately killing someone after bumping up their life insurance is the first and easiest thing to track. Like, just give it a couple years.
One, no. Oof, duh. When I feel like the people that take out that much money on kids, like, that should be questionable no matter what.
Absolutely. The policies of this life insurance were mailed out the day before the fire.
Jesus.
Winner.
When I understand having some life insurance on your children so that, like, in the event of a tragedy or something, you can, like, bury them.
Correct. Like, to pay for funeral costs, I think life insurance is important. But I also think, like,
the only reason why I feel like you would need that much money is if you were, like, owned a home and, like, this could cover our mortgage, or, like, this could pay the bills if something were to happen to me to take care of my kids, or, like, something like that. And that's, like, an adult taking out that much. There's no reason why, like, a child.
Why 2 kids need
that
$100,000 of insurance.
Mm-hmm.
The real motive, prosecutors would argue, was to get the boys, which was a really common source of fighting between Claire and Ed, out of their lives. His wife would testify that shortly before the fire, she had threatened to leave Ed over his, like, very strict discipline of the boys, who were, again, sons from a previous marriage, and take their newborn third son, which was
Jackson.
Joby and Jason.
Joby and Jason,
previous marriage.
Got it.
Ed and Claire had another child named Edward III.
Yikes.
And she said that if they got divorced, that, like, if he's not going to loosen up his discipline and stop beating her children, she's going to leave him and take their son, Edward, with her.
Yikes.
The case was largely circumstantial, though. The thing that likely clinched his conviction was the scientific testimony of a pair of forensic examiners, Joseph Porter. He was an investigator with the state fires marshal's office, testified that based on his analysis of photos of the remains of the scene, the door of the shed must have been locked from the outside at the time of the fire, which would indicate foul play. He also said there was obvious charring patterns on the floor of the shed left by an accelerant.
Yes, the gas, yeah.
The prosecution's other expert was a top fire investigator from New York, known for his report of the Osage Avenue fire.
Okay.
A notorious fire set by Philadelphia officials that destroyed primarily black neighborhood. Was brought to testify, and basically he said, like, there's no way it wasn't arson.
Yeah.
If the fire was intentionally set, then Ed was the only suspect with means, motive, and opportunity to do it. Even if there was no direct evidence connecting him to the crime, the circumstantial evidence and the word of 2 arson experts was enough, and the jury deliberated for 4 hours before pronouncing him guilty of capital murder. We're not quite done. Don't you worry. So the jurors then had to decide the punishment. The district attorney, Vic Faisal, said that the facts of the case cry out for the death penalty. 2 boys burned alive, murdered by their parent. Defense attorney Charles McDonald gave an impassioned plea to the jurors, had convicted an innocent man, and this would make this injustice irreversible if you kill them. And if they chose, like, execution over life in prison. And his attorney would say, quote, "I'm asking for this man's life because if you did make a mistake, there's going to be some folks somewhere down the line. It may be years, but maybe this mistake can be corrected. If you take this man's life, there ain't no way to ever correct it." Love all that law school, and you still use words like ain't. Ain't ya. The jurors, like, seem to find this argument quite compelling because they would convict Ed of, the death penalty, but they would stay life in prison.
Okay.
25 years later, the Court of Texas Criminal Appeals decided that a mistake had, in fact, been made in this case.
Oof, duh.
Love that for us. The investigators who testified that the fire was arson used what the years since have been discredited as junk science.
Oh.
So what they used back in the day has now been discredited.
Sure.
Saying, like, they're not real anymore. A state review panel set up to examine bad forensic science in arson cases said that the evidence did not point to an incendiary fire, meaning
something with accelerant in there.
Yes. A Top fire scientists in the field went on to say one step further, the way the boys had died from carbon monoxide inhalation rather than burns proved the fire couldn't have been set by gas spreading an accelerant and thus was likely accidental. The defense's theory was that the boys, who multiple witnesses said had a history of playing with matches and cigarettes, had accidentally set the fire themselves and while attempting to put it out, were overcome by carbon monoxide poisoning.
Gotcha.
The reason Ed's case was reviewed a quarter of a century after he barely escaped the death sentence was because of one guy named Cameron Todd Willingham. He was convicted based on similar faulty science evidence and the testimony of a jailhouse informant who later recanted and said he was bribed of murdering his 3 children by setting their home on fire 2 days before Christmas in 1991. Wilhelm was executed 11 years ago. So he was like executed, and then it turned out like someone's like, I was just joking. Oopsie. Only after his death was it revealed publicly that the forensic evidence used to convict him was shit.
Sure.
In 2009, the New Yorker's David Gran wrote a groundbreaking article describing Texas's flawed case against him. The story sparked a national uproar over forensic scientists and the death penalty in general. So, then Texas did something a little surprising. We all know Texas. Yeehaw.
Yeehaw.
While the state had not budged in its use of the death penalty, the last year topping over 500 executions since the state brought back capital punishment in 1982, it reinvented itself as a leader in arson science and investigation because apparently they fucked it up enough.
Woofda.
A new fire marshal named Chris Connolly revamped the state's training and investigative standards. He also set up a panel comprised of some of the top fire scientists in the county to reconsider old cases that had probably been improperly handled by the original investigators. So Ed's case was one of the first to come up for review, and it was determined that the original investigators had made critical mistakes. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals agreed and overturned the original conviction.
Wow.
So Ed's successful appeal proved that Texas was serious about correcting past errors, but his story would be far from over. So prosecutors in Waco weren't convinced of him being innocent because he was a piece of shit.
Yeah, not to mention he had other issues prior.
They felt that even with all of this, they still had enough evidence to reconvict him. Just because the forensic science was flawed, it didn't change the fact that in the eyes of prosecutors, Ed was a bad employee, a bad husband, a bad father, and a man capable of murdering his adopted children. So they would set up a new trial. Love that. And Ed became the first man in Texas to be retried for an arson murder that had been overturned thanks to advances in fire science. His new trial set up a clash between modern forensics and the old way of pursuing criminal justice in Texas, and which was a state where prosecutors have often gone to questionable lengths to win convictions against high-profile murder defendants, include multiple men who have been later proved innocent. Again, go Texas. So prosecutors in Graf's retrial spared no effort to win a second conviction in a strange and dramatic retrial in October. The trial's surreal and unforeseeable conclusion would have a profound impact not just on the fate of Ed, but on the lives of prisoners who, in the wake of the Willingham case, held out hope that their convictions might be overturned. So, beautiful. That brings us to this next case. When TJ Clinch first took the witness stand for Ed's defense back in 1988, he had been a nervous 10-year-old. A couple of months before Jason and Joby died, the brothers had been playing at Clinch's house when they found some matches and lit a cup of grass on fire. Because boys will be boys.
Ugh.
Clinch got scared and they quickly blew it out. Defense attorneys used Clinch's testimony and that of multiple other witnesses to portray that the two boys had a fascination with fire. When Jason and Joby's mother, whose name now is Claire Bradburn, she got remarried, remembers what she said about her children. She said it was just angers her because she really thought that wasn't true. You know, it's hard to listen to things like people saying your kids suck.
Yeah.
They're just kids. They're little boys. So 26 years later, on October 7th, 2020, Clinch was called back to the Waco's 54th District courtroom, this time to testify for the prosecution. So he switched sides. He had become a thin, serious-looking 37-year-old real estate agent. He still looked kind of young, kind of boyish, they describe him as being. He seemed kind of almost still like that very frail, nervous child.
Mm-hmm.
So, quote, the story of them being this bad person playing with fire all the time, there was one instance we played with matches or fire. They wouldn't have been playing in that shed, he would say, as he broke down in tears. One person had said she'd seen one of the brothers go into the shed, though only 4 or 5 days before the fire. So, like, again, she just kind of didn't make a ton of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Terry Willis told a detective that Joby had taken her to the shed the week before the fire and that he even knew where the key to the shed was. Joby, according to Terry, told her not to mention it to his father because he wasn't allowed to be in the shed.
Mm-hmm.
So in 2014, Terry, whose last name is now Reinwald, was testifying against Graf. So again, a lot of these people who originally testified for the defense switched over to the prosecution for this next trial. So a lot of things kind of come out, and this court case is just using a lot of emotional power against people.
Yeah.
Obviously, the prosecutor's gut-wrenching story of 2 little boys stolen from their family and friends had a lot to kind of say. This whole thing, though, is that Ed maintained an excruciating display of composure during the trial. He barely blinked when his own son, who had disowned him, Edward, more than a decade earlier testified against him. The only time he almost broke down was when a defense lawyer read the testimony of his mother, whose death and funeral he'd missed while in prison, saying that he loved them very much. He was good to those children. He played with them, worked with them, took them places. There's no way he could have hurt those babies. So basically all he did then was rubbed his eyes and shifted. So
good.
Love that for him, right? It's just a lot of weird things that happen. And you can continue to read a little bit more about that court case. But what would end up happening is that Ed would be found guilty again for the second time. So despite all of this, they were like, yeah, you suck. And they would then reconvict him, this time for 60 years, 30 consecutive sentences. However, what you don't get with that, hold on, I lost my spot. This is the best part of being on a podcast. There it is. Perfect. So, but at this point, evidence became that 10 people wanted a mostly guilty verdict, and there was 2 holdouts on the jury. The judge ordered them after 3 hours of deliberation to kind of keep working. And it was interesting. But more than 6 hours into deliberation, the jury was still deadlocked. And to the surprise of memory, they recessed for the evening. They deliberated for 5 more hours the next day, again, without returning with a verdict. Something shocking then happened. Sorry, I got the things confused. 11 hours into deadlock, when it seemed to be possible that the trial would end in a hung jury, Ed Graf would change his not guilty plea
to
guilty of murdering his 2 adopted sons.
Jesus. I feel 11 hours is not that long to wait for.
But there's a reason for this. The plea made no sense. It appeared that Ed was admitting guilt in exchange for virtually nothing. He was already serving a life sentence with the eligibility for parole, and he confessed in exchange for 2 60-year sentences to run concurrently with credit given for time served during the past 2.5 decades. But Ed, 62, was left with more than 30 years left to go on his sentence, which basically made it a life sentence.
Yeah.
As Abel Reyna noted, announcing the verdict to the jury, he was one of the people there. The parole board was not going to look kindly on a twice convicted double child murderer,
right,
who had falsely said he was innocent for super long. Family members of the victims were ready to contest any request for parole, including his own son and family.
Right, exactly.
Right. Prosecutors also promised to contest every attempt. So it appeared that he confessed for murder, forfeiting his right to ever say he was innocent, forfeiting the right to the new scientific evidence, forfeiting a new trial, possibly a hung jury. no appeals, nothing. Like, he just was like, yep, I'm guilty.
Jesus.
But, like, a lot of weird things were going on. Like, had the scientific evidence been wrong? Was he guilty after all? Had his conscience finally got the better of him? On the last question, it appears that the answer would be no. Because Ed Graf would be released on parole 8 days after his guilty plea.
Really?
Mm-hmm. What Graf and his attorneys knew, and the district attorney apparently did not, is that there's a loophole in Texas's parole law for capital crimes that took place prior to 1987. In such cases, parole must be granted automatically when it's an inmate's time served and his credited time for good behavior adds up to his sentence. So after his first trial, Ed had been sentenced to life, meaning he would not be able to take advantage of this loophole. No sum of years can add up to a lifetime sentence. But his new plea deal put a number on his sentence, 60 years. And Graf had more than enough time served and time credited for good behavior to go free on parole immediately and automatically, no matter what the district attorney would do or say. So this whole thing is that he decided that he was guilty, and he confessed and talked
Because
about
he
his crime
knew that
because
he would get out.
Because his lawyers were smarter and knew what the loophole was. If they convicted him again to life, this never happens. He's never released. However, putting a timeline on it gave him the opportunity to leave. So, Ed, out and about. Ed, is living his best life. So that's the story of Ed Graf. It's a little bit different than the ones we usually kind of talk about, just because it's a lot of like, we started with him knowing he was convicted of a crime. But I think this one's interesting just with all the twists and the turns of bad dude, convicted of a crime, did something awful, and then like found guilty, goes to prison. Evidence turns around, says like he might not be guilty. Gets basically near the end of like maybe a hung jury and being able to go. And it's like, no, actually I did murder them. And then he gets set free anyways.
What a horrible, loophole.
I know. I was looking up again.
Well, and to be fair, his lawyers obviously are very good.
Oh, can you imagine sitting down and reading and the person who found out that loophole and was like, dude, just say you're guilty. You can just go home.
What the hell?
And how awful to be everyone else in that courtroom.
Right.
Because this man did it.
Mm-hmm.
And he's saying he did it. And now...
But he still gets to go home.
He gets to go home because of some weird fucking law. And this is why I couldn't be a lawyer.
No, and I feel like that's the tragedy of...
today's court system?
Our justice system, that there's so many loopholes. There's so many ways if you have enough money to pay the right people off. There's definitely a bias in the amount of charging and investigation that's done depending on who the victim is. And it's really sad to think that justice wasn't really served to these two boys. And you could say, well, he did serve time in there, but it doesn't bring those two boys back,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and knowing that he was a bad dude
before that.
All the way around. The murder really made him a bad dude. But he was awful in life. He's not a good employee. He's not a good husband. He's not a good friend. He's not a good son. He sucked. He was a terrible father. And the fact that he has to now just live in society after being such a bad person, I'm like, I can't imagine.
No. I can't either.
If you were in that courtroom and he is 11 hours. Actually,
I'll be guilty.
I did it.
And then everyone's like, oh, okay.
Oh, what?
And then 8 days later, he's walking out.
I'm sure the confusion that comes across everyone's face of why is this guy doing it?
Mm-hmm.
He's going to be reconvicted then. He can't appeal if he pleads guilty. He can't have another trial if he pleads guilty. There's no opportunity for him to go out on parole.
And then you have this hope of like maybe he just has like come to a sense.
Maybe he grew a conscience in the last 11 hours.
Nah, he's just trying to F everyone over again.
Like, I can't believe it. So, Ed, if you're still living, I hope you croak. Okay?
You deserve nothing but the worst.
You deserve raging hemorrhoids.
Like, it's just such a terrible
end to the story, right? Yeah, no, that one I was like, twists and turns and twists and turns. Because, like, I could have read you more about the original case, but the main point of the twist and the turn is that he was guilty
the entire time.
But because of the way our justice
shitty
system
loopholes,
works,
he gets out.
Yeah. Doesn't make you feel better.
No.
So that being said, I couldn't be a lawyer because if you're guilty of killing your 2 boys, and you can't tell me that lawyer didn't fucking know that he was guilty.
100%.
Like, I can't be rooting for you.
Well, and I feel like there's always that sense of like, if you're a criminal defense lawyer, like, I don't even want to know.
Yeah. I just have to believe you're innocent.
I just have to do my job. Like, I would prefer to know less. Thank you. And I get that. Like, that's not their fault. There has to be defense lawyers.
There has to be. Because there are innocent folks out there who deserve.
Yeah. It's just really shitty when you don't get one of them.
No kidding. Yeah. So that's my fun little last wrap up to our true crime series.
Uh-huh.
It's a little bit of a longer one.
Definitely. And as we go into the month of June, we have a lot to look forward to. We'll have to come up with some fun ideas for episodes and things like that. I've been thinking about a few different things.
I feel like we should start drinking when we do this. Except for we do this on Monday when we film. And
I know, especially now that we're going into summertime.
That's true. We could now.
I could drink whenever I want.
We could do like a weekly drink. There you go.
That would be fun. And if you have drink suggestions, we could like do a mixology. Like, what are you drinking today?
I'll post recipes.
That'll be fun.
Look at us.
I listened to a Dance Moms podcast, and that's how they start their episode is by telling each other what they're drinking.
Oh.
And then how many drinks they needed to get through the episode. But for this, it could be like, how many drinks did you need to prepare for whatever we're talking about that day?
Honestly,
like this one,
I would have needed
10.
So many. I at some point need to black out.
Makes the pain go away.
Makes me less sad.
Versus summer, it's like, it's funny, so I didn't need any. Yeah. But it's still fun to drink as we talk about it.
I would drink a fun, like, Bahama Mama, just for the mood.
Yeah. So if you have any drink suggestions or episode suggestions, definitely let us know. And we will be rolling into summer with you next week. Ooh.